Hello, everyone, and welcome to another ETN Files interview. This is your host, Joanna Summerscales, and it's July 2021. My guest today is Dave Hodrien from Birmingham UFO Group, known as BUFOG. I first met Dave quite a few years ago now, in fact, 2009, when I was a speaker at Betty Myler's UFO conference over in Ireland. And then in 2011, when I started the AWACS project, Dave was really supportive and certainly helped me smooth things along there. So I have been wondering what Dave has been up to in the intervening years. I know he's been creating lots of things, including a board game, and is an avid UFO researcher. So let's get on with our interview and hear what Dave has to say. I'm going to get Dave to tell you a little bit about what BUFOG is, but before that, a little bit about his history and how he got into BUFOG, which is the Birmingham UFO Group. Okay, over to you, Dave.
Thank you, John. So, yes, if I take things right back, as many people have had an interest in the paranormal since childhood, lots of different aspects of it, not just UFOs, but also ghosts, Bigfoot, everything. I've always been fascinated by mysteries of the world and things that haven't been fully explained.
Was there anything that stimulated that interest? Did you have any experiences yourself? Or
not back then, no. I had a sighting in 2009, and I've also had some ghost type experiences as well while I was back at university. But it was just a general fascination. I don't know. Some of the old books I used to read, Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World, things like that. I was just fascinated by just these stories, just these incredible things that had happened to people. And I just remember really spooking myself out there with a torch after dark, just reading this stuff, was really creeping myself out. From about age 10 or 11 or something, I started to look into UFOs in a bit more depth and everything. And the more I looked into it, the more fascinated I became with the subject. It just really hit home for me, just the amount of incredible cases on record. And I just thought, there's just too much going on here. It can't all be hoaxes or misidentifications. Yeah. I mean, there's obviously quite a lot of cases where things are seen and they're quite distant. And yes, some of those are obviously inevitably are misidentifications. But there's so many cases on record where people had proper close encounters with physical craft. And then even closer, obviously, the contact subject. Back then, it wasn't like I've always been particularly drawn to that particular aspect, but since becoming an actual UFO investigator, that has become of particular interest to me. So how did I become an investigator? Well, I started going to conferences when I was about 16 or something. I live in Solihull, just south of Birmingham, and the late, great Graham Birdsall used to run UFO magazines conferences in Solihull initially. They eventually moved up north to Leeds, etc. But brilliant. It was really convenient because I couldn't drive back then or anything, but I could just get a bus in and start going to UFO conferences. And I just remember probably the first one ever. And I just remember being there and seeing these people who are on the front lines of this subject, investigators talking about actual cases that they'd been involved in and gone and looked into. And I just found it incredible. I thought how amazing that would be to be on the front lines with this and speak to people who'd had actual experiences. Now, I could have become an active investigator a lot sooner. I continued having a very, very deep interest in the subject, continued going to conferences. But it wasn't really till the formation of Birmingham UFO Group in 2007 that it became my driving force to become an active investigator. I liked the idea of being the investigator for a group. So rather than just being Dave Hodrien, UFO investigator, I was the investigator for Birmingham UFO Group. Yeah. Now, I wasn't the original chairman of the group. The chairman of the group is two guys, Mark and Craig. They put together BUFOG initially. And I just remember coming across an advert for it online and thinking, oh, wicked, as a local UFO group, I can go along and meet other people fascinated in the subject, have a good old chinwag. And it was close enough to reach. It was convenient. And up until that point, the closest one, I think, was UFO Research West Midlands, UFO Research Midlands, UFORM. And UFORM at that point was kind of backing out from doing direct meetings. And a lot of the people who used to go to UFORM arranged to start to come to BUFOG. And UFORM actually helped BUFOG get started up, help them arrange things. So I was one of the initial members to sign up. And the initial meetings were just in the corner of a pub. It was just a get-together. I'd been there a couple of months, and there was 4 young lads who came down. And they'd had a recent sighting that had taken place in King's Winford in North Birmingham. And it was absolutely fascinating. And speaking with them, it was a proper close encounter. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I thought it'd be really good to go out to the location where this happened. So I told Craig and Mark, I said, I'm planning to go out to the sighting location. And they were like, do you want to investigate it for Birmingham UFO Group? And I was like, yeah, sure. Why not? So that became my first case investigation report for Birmingham UFO Group. Now, I didn't tell the lads I was going to do this. When we went out there, I interviewed them each individually. I just took them to one side and interviewed them and got them to draw what they'd seen. And without any prior warning of this, there was no doubt in my mind that they'd had a real encounter. All the drawings married up. There was minor differences. You get this with multiple witnesses. There's always a few little minor changes, So somebody described orange lights, somebody described red lights, somebody described 5 lights, 4 lights. But essentially what they'd seen was a black octagonal shaped craft with 4 white lights and then a larger central light in its base, completely silent, only a couple of 100 feet above their heads. At King's Winford, the area where they'd gone to was a clearing in this woodland, and they'd seen it at a distance, and at a distance they just thought it was an aircraft. It just looked like a mix of blue and red and white light. But as it came nearer, they realised it was quite low down to the ground, lower down than a plane would usually fly at, and it seemed to be going a bit slower as well. It's coming towards them, so they drew their attention to it, and it came in, and it came up the hill, and it went over the clearing over their heads and hovered and seemed to slow down temporarily as it passed over the clearing, almost like it was checking them out. And then it carried on away and across the rest of the woodland. They gave chase and everything. They went into great detail of this. I mean, one of them said that because it was so pitch black, they tripped over some brambles and sprained their ankle, because they were too busy looking up at this thing, and it's these little details that come out that'll tell you, that they were talking about a real experience. You could just tell from speaking with them. This is something, they were very excited about it. And they got to the edge and they saw this thing go away over Dudley, and they could still see it for a period of time afterwards, or what they believed was it, just moving backwards and forwards in the sky. But of course, at a distance, it just looked like a helicopter or something again, but they knew it wasn't, and they were staring at it for, they think, up to half an hour. So this was an extended sighting. Slight possibility that at some point they got muddled up and had started watching what was indeed a patrol helicopter instead of the actual thing. We don't know. They essentially saw it go away into the distance, and then were seeing it move left and right, and they were pretty sure it was still it. But yeah, I mean, they saw it directly over their heads, so it was a very good case. And I put together the case report. Craig and Mark were happy with it and said, do you want to become the official investigator for Birmingham UFO Group? I absolutely readily took that on. Wonderful. And I've been investigating cases ever since.
Guys have anything like missing time or?
No, didn't look like any form of contact had gone on. There was a lot of discrepancy in terms of how long they were standing there for, but I believe that was because they were so transfixed by what they were looking at. Yeah, so for some of them, time had seemed to slow down, but it wasn't like time had actually slowed down or anything like that. There was no sign that they'd been taken or anything. That case went out, and a couple of years went on. Started investigating cases. I mean, between then and now, I've lost count. What I do know is UFO sightings, easily over 1,000 cases. Contact cases, around 300 from around the world. And I'm not keeping a regular log that I tick and add cases to. But yeah, a substantial amount of cases. Through dealing with that many cases, I've got a very sort of deep knowledge of the different aspects that can occur, especially with the contact subjects. I'm also very aware of the alternatives for those aspects. So things that are not contact, but people can misidentify as contact. I deal with a lot of cases where people come to me directly with experiences. Most of my cases are from down on the ground, everyday civilians, all walks of life, all backgrounds, all ages. I've dealt with cases involving children, right up to elderly people. Many of the cases have been from abroad. Obviously, quite a lot of the cases from around the UK, focused around the Midlands, especially because we're Birmingham UFO Group, yeah. But I still get many cases in from elsewhere, and I've dealt with cases as far wide as Australia. I've even had some cases in, get this, I've had some cases in from Birmingham, Alabama. When I've contacted Birmingham UFO Group thinking it's Birmingham, Alabama, American, and I've told them I'm in the UK, but I'll still look into their case. So I've written up some cases from Birmingham, Alabama. Yeah, essentially that investigative work has become my work outside of my work. I don't earn any money off it, nor do I ever want to earn any money off it. I'm not in this for any kind of fame or fortune at all. I do what I do. The contact thing has become almost a sense of duty for me because of the ridicule and the effect it can have on people who experience contact. I've spoken with people who've been in all different ways around it. Some people react to it very positively. Some people have been in a state of fear with it and have got through that. Other people are still very much in that fear state, as you yourself know, Joanne.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I've dealt with some of those cases, and they really bring home the reality of this subject, and it's not like it's portrayed on television, because people only see it at a very high level. They see, oh yeah, people get taken up in the craft, yeah, so what, this sort of thing, that's just a small part of what's going on with this. It can really, really deeply affect people, and leave them in long-term issues, depression and panic attacks and things. Seeing those cases up front has kind of led me to have a kind of sense of duty to be there for these people who've had these experiences.
I think that's really wonderful. And I see it as, because I'm doing a similar thing as a social service. And I mean that, really, absolutely. Because I'm also a regression therapist, and I've been in the sort of healing and meditation and all of that energy healing kind of field years ago. And that's an overlay for me. So I'm very interested in people's well-being. And I want to know, the impact this has. And it's really been an education to learn what people go through, the isolation, the ridicule, the, oh my goodness, the divorces, the lost businesses. I've been asked to take down interviews I've done because someone's got an interview coming up and, oh my God, they might see it for employers, and many, many more things. And families have split up. Really, you wouldn't believe the depth of trauma sometimes, not all the time. It can be caused, and the PTSD that is a reality. And so for those who would snigger and make fun and go, oh yeah, think again, because if something happened to anybody and there was a PTSD element, I mean, that doesn't go away in 5 seconds or 5 minutes, and that it impacts so many different layers of psychology. So congratulations to you for carrying on doing it. And I think this work that we're doing is very important. And also is education. It's sharing with the public. I mean, the people that we interview they're public. We're public. But it's sharing it in a way that is understandable, in as much as this is Joe and Joanne public. This is us having these experiences and researching this and helping to try and bring some degree of understanding of why, what, how, and all the rest of that. And even if we don't come close to all of that, what we do know, and I'm sure you found this, is that the consciousness quotient, the QC, is entirely changed because of it. I mean, it's just, absolutely. When I say just a sighting, I don't mean to negate that, because some people I've spoken to who've had sightings which have been maybe like these guys, up close and personal. It has changed their paradigm forever. They now know it's all real. So that's very interesting. So I think what you're doing is fantastic.
I mean, that's where that's kind of come from, and that's really what I'm doing that for, and that's what I continue to do it for primarily. But also, in a way, I'm kind of helping, I suppose, towards disclosure in a little part in what I do in the case reports that I put out. Now, in terms of the investigation work, so I probably go down to a level that many other researchers do not go down to with this, to a greater level of depth. So there's a lot of researchers out there, and what they'll do is they'll take in case details and they'll put them on a file. There'll be a sightings form or something that somebody will fill out, and they'll just essentially log that sightings file there. And that'll be with whatever details the person has decided to add. And that'll be it. And it'll just be online for people to see. And that's great and everything. I'm not trying to belittle that, because that's information that's out there. That's great. But every single case, whether it be a small light in the sky or a full-blown close encounter or a contact experience, it's a story in its own right, that needs to be told in as much depth as possible. And I essentially leave no stone unturned. I then write up a very detailed case report, confidential, I might add. I have to specify confidential. So if people don't want their name going out in the report, I don't put their name in the report. I'm not like a journalist who'll just take the details and just put it all out. I always ask the witness, are they happy with what I've included? Sometimes they leave out their address. Sometimes they leave out even the town that they live in. I've dealt with some cases where they were only happy with revealing which country they were in. That, in a way, shows how real the experiences are, because they're not after fame and fortune either. They're not trying to sell it to a paper or trying to get their name out into the public eye as being, I had this amazing experience. They very much vehemently want their details to be left out. It's all about what's happened, not exactly who it's happened to. That's what's important. And that's what goes in the case reports. I add maps, I add witness drawings. Now, in a lot of cases, obviously, there aren't photographs or videos, even in this day and age. There's a number of very valid reasons for that. even by today's standards, there's still very few cases that have video or photographic proof with them. So a witness drawing is the next best thing. So I'll usually ask the witnesses to do sketches of what they've seen. And then that all gets put out online for those who want to view it. There are literally hundreds of case reports now available free of charge on the Birmingham website, Birmingham UFO Group website, inside the blog. You can search by date, you can search by location, and you can search by either craft type or aspect that's occurred. So, for example, you typed in missing time, it's going to come up with cases where I've mentioned missing time and that sort of thing. So it's got basic search functionality to look things up. Now, there's been some nice comeback sometimes from the case reports. So a lot of the time they go up there and that's it, and they're just being read by people around the world and it's hopefully changing their perception on the subject. Yeah. But occasionally we've actually had new witnesses come forward because of them, and that's brilliant. I love it when that happens.
Oh, that's great.
So this is because my website, it's a Wix website. I built it through Wix from ground up, and it's linked directly with Google. So if people look for, let's say they've had a sighting in 1965 and they want to see whether anybody else saw it. So one day they decide to go online and type in UFO sighting 1965 London or wherever it took place.
Yeah.
Lo and behold, up comes my case report of a completely other witness who's seen it. And that's happened on a number of occasions, and they've got in touch and said, I've read your report, I saw it as well. Yeah. Absolutely amazing case where we had 3 different groups of individuals. Happened in August 1974, and it was essentially a V-shaped formation of oval-shaped silver discs that flew in an S shape down the United Kingdom. They were seen as far north as Liverpool, right down to Devon. I got some of the cases in. I learned of other ones through other researchers after a period of time. The 3 cases I had in, the initial one was from Castle Vale in North Birmingham. That spawned a second sighting by a lovely chap named Gary, sadly now deceased, but he had a sighting in Solihull as a child. So he was only 9 years old in 1974. So he went over that with me. And that came directly as a result of him coming across this Castle Vale sighting, and he knew it was the same thing. Then a couple of years later, we thought it was completely unrelated, but I got another one in from Liverpool. And through looking at it, it was obvious that it was the same thing. Now, he said it was August 1973. But I got not 1974, but I got in touch with, obviously it happened a long time ago. I said, could you be mistaken on the year? He said, absolutely. So straight away, it was the same thing.
Dave, I'm really intrigued to hear details of a case you just mentioned a little bit that is military in nature. And I know we've got another one perhaps to mention, but,
sure.
But maybe we could go through that one.
Absolutely. Yeah, while we're talking about cases, yes. So we do have monthly meetings for BUFOG in Albury, North Birmingham, but obviously due to the situation, currently not holding those. But I'll hopefully get those physical meetings up and running again later in the year. At the meetings, we tend to invite speakers. You yourself obviously come and talk, and we get different speakers in from around the UK and sometimes for international speakers, and have special screenings of documentaries, that sort of thing. A bit more on the group, actually, before I go over that case. Just wanted to cover how I became the chairman. So, yeah, a couple of years went by as an investigator for the group. And then in 2009, Craig and Mark handed over the running of the group to me as well. For them, it was a short-term thing. It's a lot of things in life. People can have a passion for a period of time and then go off that after a while. Whereas me, I knew that this was a lifer for me. It always has been, always will be.
And also, sometimes, it's family commitments and that kind of thing.
It takes a lot of time and effort to keep things running. So they knew I was the right person for the job. So they handed over the group to me, and I've been running it directly since 2009. And long may it continue. That's this case. Yeah, so the investigations, they keep on coming in, of course, and I've continued to put out reports throughout the lockdown. And some of those cases have been absolutely fascinating. And there's a recent one came my way from a military witness. Now, as I said earlier on, a lot of my cases are from straight up everyday civilians. Yeah. But very occasionally I'll get contacted by somebody with a military background. This gentleman, there's only certain things I can reveal about this case. I'm not allowed to reveal his name, not allowed to reveal his squadron, not allowed to reveal the precise location of where this took place.
Is it in the UK?
No, it's in Greece. The incident took place on an East Coast Greek Air Force base, one of the main ones. Okay. That's all I'm allowed to say. But essentially, what happened was back in 1989, he and his squadron had a sighting of a flying triangular-shaped UFO over their Air Force base. So this happened in July 1989. His squadron, they were a part of an exercise where they do combat simulation training. And he was an aircraft mechanic. So he's now an ex-aircraft mechanic. But because of how sensitive the case is, as you'll find out as we continue to discuss it, a lot of the details he couldn't reveal to me. He has provided some photographic proof of his background, and a couple of the photos that he provided me with, he's allowed me to put in the report with editing to them. So the photos are of him on the Air Force Base, essentially. So what happened? So July 1989, he and his squadron are in part of this combat exercise. He's an aircraft mechanic. There were 3 other aircraft mechanics. There were 4 weapon handlers and 4 pilots. His squadron were essentially on emergency duty. If asked to, they would take off the jets from the runway and simulate being an enemy invading force. And then other jets would be sent up to essentially try to sort them out in a combat exercise. At the end of the runway, it was just basically a holding building where he and his squadron would basically hang around and wait to be called to go on to these emergency exercises. And they used to regularly change out and go outside and check out the aircraft just to make sure that they were fully fueled and that there was no damage to any of the aircraft. And he went out shortly after midnight, leaving the rest of the squadron inside the building, and went and examined the planes. Then he goes and hands out to the next aircraft mechanic, and then it's his turn to go and do the same period of time afterwards. Then steps outside the building to stretch his legs. It's a lovely, clear sky. Some cloud cover, but you can see some stars through the gaps. And he leans back and happens to glance up into the air. About 500 meters away from him, roughly about halfway along the runway, so we're talking about the center of the Air Force Base, he sees a triangle of lights. They're dim red in color. So in a triangle, equilateral triangle, estimates that it's about 500 meters up. 300 to 500 meters up, I think he said it was. And he said, and so he's looking at it from about a 45-degree angle from where he's standing. And it's hovering completely motionless. There's no sound coming from it. So obviously, as an aircraft mechanic working on Air Force Base, he knows military aircraft inside and out. He knows civilian aircraft inside and out. He knows how they look at various distances after dark and in daylight. He knows exactly what sort of sounds they make at various distances. He said at that distance, let's say it had been some sort of unusual helicopter with rotor blades, he said he would have heard the rotor blades. This thing was completely and utterly silent. At 300 to 500 meters, which is going to be a pretty good guess because of his military background, he says the object would have been between 98 to 115 feet across. Now, he couldn't see the main bulk of the object. He could just see the lights, but he was pretty sure that it was 3 lights in the base of a single object rather than 3 smaller objects in type formation. Right. They never moved from that position throughout the sighting, even when the thing started to move. So what happened was he calls out the rest of his squadron. What on earth's that up there? None of them could identify it. They're all fascinated by it. They're all staring at it. They don't walk along the runway. It's quite a distance away. Obviously, the base is very, very big. So they're still at the west end of the runway, just looking at this thing at a distance, a diagonal. But nobody can identify it. They're staring at it for about 10 minutes, chattering backwards and forwards to each other. During this time, it doesn't move whatsoever. Then, all of a sudden, have a guess what happens next. You know what I'm going to say now. So all of a sudden, the thing just shoots off like a bullet, heads out eastwards over the coast, off out over the sea. He said it had gone from into the distance in the space of about 1 to 2 seconds at most. Wow. He said the speed would have been thousands of miles an hour, no sound whatsoever. Or the only sound was a whoosh of the wind when it moved. It disturbed the air, and he heard a whoosh sound, but he believed that was from the air current moving, not the object itself. Okay. So they were all obviously gobsmacked at what had just happened. They knew that whatever this thing was, it was no drone, it was no military helicopter or anything like that. And because they're part of this exercise, he's thinking, well, of course, they've got this thing on radar. They must have got it on radar. Our walkie-talkies are about to go off. Yeah. They're going to get us to go and intercept or something like that. Nothing came through yet. There was no alarm raised or anything. So they just go back into their into their bunker, and they carry on until morning time, and their shift ends about 6 a.m. and they go back to their barracks and all have a sleep. When they wake up later in the day, after a number of hours, they all get a call to go to their commanding officer's barracks. They go in there, and it's immediately obvious that their commanders were aware of what they'd seen over the base. And what they said to them is, they said, "We were aware that you saw something last night out over the runway." And what they told them that it was something similar to an AWACS plane. An AWACS plane it's got a large round radar dish sitting on top of the plane. It's essentially for radar jamming purposes. AWACS planes are normal aircraft. Yeah, they do not hover silently. They have to continuously move. They can't hover like a helicopter, and they definitely don't shoot off at thousands of miles an hour from a standing still stop. Nor do they have red lights in a triangular formation and no other coloured lights on them. So straight away, both the man and the rest of his squadron, they were all aware that this obviously wasn't what they'd seen, and it was obvious to them that a cover-up had gone on regarding this. They were told not to talk about it to anybody.
Don't talk about an AWACS being there then.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So they said that they couldn't talk about it, and yet they said it was something similar to. They said they were testing. It was some sort of new aircraft, and it was similar to an AWACS aircraft. Obviously, I cover.
Yeah. Sorry, David. I was just going to say, how many people were there giving the guys in the squadron this story? Was it just one, or were there several?
Oh, there was a few people in the room. So yeah. There wasn't anything untoward. He didn't mention any kind of shadowy figures standing there wearing shades or anything like that. I know in some cases you do actually get that, sounds like a bit of a joke, obviously, since the Men in Black movies and that sort of thing. But there are cases on record where people have had shadowy figures, unidentified people in suits standing at the back of the room. Because of course, while the Men in Black films are comedy films, they are at least partially based on actual real life cases. At a high level, obviously. With this, it was obvious that a cover-up had gone on, and this is why the case is so sensitive. The man was very, very edgy about discussing this with me. I had to gain his trust over a long period of time, just to tell him that his details wouldn't be given out, only what he allowed to be given out would be. And I've gained that trust now, and it's great.
Oh, do you know if any of the guys actually spoke to the radar people?
Yes, I was going to get to that. So the gentleman who's contacted me, he actually knew some of the guys who ran the radar on the base, and he spoke with them not immediately afterwards, but a number of weeks afterwards, and they informed him that nothing had been picked up on radar. So that implies that this object was using some kind of radar jamming stealth type technology. Yeah. It's a very good case. Obviously. Some of the details had to remain hidden, so it's never going to be one of these cases where the people involved are going to ever be known about, unless other people involved in it decide to come forward and share their names. I obviously treat his confidentiality at highest discretion. But there's a big case I investigated from up Glasgow, and it involves a 56-year-old man who's had numerous contact experiences throughout his life. Now, this is a big case, and I can't go over everything. I'm going to cover a couple of his experiences here, ones which I think your listeners will find particularly fascinating, but he's had many experiences, and they're all documented fully. Or any case I go over, you can always find the report on the BUFOG site to fill in the gaps. But one of his first main experiences, he had some childhood kind of ghost type experiences, people who'd suddenly vanish and this sort of thing. But his first main experience involved a dual abduction of both him and his elder brother. Occurred when he was 7 years old, and his brother was, I think, 9 at the time. Now, this happened in 1971 in the outskirts of Glasgow, called Grangemouth. And one of the great things about this is he'd actually written down the details. So a lot of the time when I go to somebody to go over their case with them, they haven't haven't got anything in advance to give me.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
With this, what he'd done is a number of years before I spoke with him, he decided to put together a little diary of weird things that had gone on through his life. And the first main thing that in that diary was what I'm about to cover. So he'd actually written it out already, which was brilliant because, well, I mean, for a start, you know, it showed that he was talking about something that had actually happened because he had everything. He had drawings and everything that he'd done many years before. Yeah. So it wasn't like he was just coming up with them on the spot or anything. Yeah. He handed them me. He did other ones I asked him to do on top of that, but some of the ones were originals, and you can see the originals inside the report. They're labelled as such. So he handed me this diary, which really helped. And then I obviously went back with additional questions. So essentially what happened, it's an absolutely incredible incident. So it was about... It was one evening in the summer of 1971, and his parents had gone out for the evening to a play, I think. And he and his brother, there was a babysitter, and their cousin was there to babysit them for the evening. Now, around that time, he used to go up to bed about sort of 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. And there was a new show started, The Untouchables, the old gangster TV show was just on, and he was really looking forward to seeing it. And they said that he could stay up late to watch it. They allowed him to stay up an extra half hour. But there'd been some kind of delay to the programs, unfortunately, and that had meant that it couldn't start at this earlier time, and he was really annoyed by that. And he was trying to hang on to at least see the start of the program before his cousin sent him up to bed. Yeah. Now this time it's about 7 o'clock in the evening. Yeah. It's not fully dark outside. The sun's just starting to set, but it's summertime. Yeah. So I think it was early summer. So it's not. It's kind of dusk time outside. And all of a sudden. He's kind of arguing with his big brother and his cousin to stay in the room to watch his TV program. All of a sudden, the room lights up bright white. It's coming in from outside, and it's just everything is bright all around them. His cousin starts to panic and says, "Don't go to the window. Don't look out." But he's fascinated and he wants to see what it is, so he ignores that and he runs over to the window and pulls back the curtains because the curtains were drawn at that point. He pulls them back and looking outside, what he sees is a round circle of light moving along the far pavement of the road. It's House Hill Muir Road is where this took place. And you can see it moving along. You can't see where it's coming from. It's just a round circle of light on the ground, quite clearly coming from something up above that's out of sight. And it's moving along like that. And it moves up one of the walls of the houses on the opposite side of the road. At this point, he wants to get a better look. So he runs out, rushes past his brother and his cousin and runs out, opens the front door, steps outside, runs down the steps outside, runs down his front garden, stands there by the garden gate. There's white light flooding the whole area, taking out a lot of the sort of coloration. He's looking down at his clothes, and his clothes all look a kind of grey tones and everything because there's such bright white light. Looking off to the right, a few houses along, what he sees is a glowing white disc. It's hovering. He says it was at least 40 foot across, and it appears to be behind one of the houses. The roof of the house was shadowing a bit of it. Almost looked like a cake with a little slice cut out of it in the middle from the tip of this house because it's kind of behind it. So several houses along. His brother comes out and joins him. And he's turning to his brother saying, "What is going on? Look at this." You know, they're staring at this thing. He's looking at his brother, looking around. He looks around at his brother to kind of shrug to like, what's happening? What is going on with all this? His brother can't answer that. He turns back round and there's a figure to his right now, standing to his right, taller than him, but don't forget he's a child, 7 years old. He thinks is about 5 foot. He only sees the back of the figure. The figure was wearing a dark overalls, sort of top and sort of long cloak type outfit. And it's bald. He can't really see what colour its skin is. He assumes light grey. Well, he found out later on it was light grey, but we'll get to that. But it looked like grey, but then the whole surroundings did. It was a grey, but he couldn't see its face. It was facing towards the craft. It was like looking towards the craft the way they were looking, and it had its hand on his right shoulder. So it was just there all of a sudden, and then, bang! Everything changes. He's no longer standing in his garden. He's inside a bubble of light pink coloured energy of some kind of plasma, like light all around him.
Ooh, wow.
His brother's still standing there next to him. They're in exactly the same position. They're just all of a sudden surrounded in this pink light. Yeah, he's like, totally, what is going on? The pink light starts to dissipate and break apart, and as it does, he starts to see daylight through it and pieces of housing, and it starts to melt away. And as it does, he realizes two things. First of all, he's no longer standing in his garden. And secondly, it's broad daylight, and but they're standing in exactly the same position. Yeah, where he's standing is there's a side road. There's this kind of cut through pathway, several doors along, alongside the house that the disc had been behind, and he's halfway along that with his brother still standing next to him. There's another boy down on the ground playing with a toy truck. And he looks up and he's just staring at them, just mouth open. We don't know what that boy saw, but potentially you saw them appear out of thin air. They just realise they're standing in this broad daylight. They're absolutely confused. A window opens in the house next to them, and a woman leans out and says, "Oh, you two, are you the boys that have been missing? Are you the boys that have been missing all night?" Now, what we can gather from that is that his parents, it was now the next morning, but they didn't know this. It was just disoriented. It was about 10 in the morning. They'd had hours and hours of missing time, and it was now the following morning. But he didn't really know. He didn't know what time. It wasn't like he checked his watch. He worked this out later on. But this woman, what that implied was that his parents had come back, found them not there. We don't know what his cousin did or didn't know about what had taken place. Okay, and there's a very valid reason for that, so which we're going to get to right now. So they find themselves in this side passageway. They're very disoriented because it was like a second had gone by. It's like bang, and they're just changing in this totally different location. He runs back to the house. He runs down this side pass and starts going back towards his house. As he reaches the gate, he realizes he's forgetting the incident. He can actually feel the memories of it leaving his mind. And by the time he reaches the gate of his house, it's gone completely. The entire incident is gone from his mind. He doesn't know if it's gone from his big brother's mind because he never asked, because it was like, it's all a bit of a blur after that. He says life carried on as normal. For a number of years, he used to go fishing with his father, and he said that on many occasions his dad would bring up the UFO subject with him. It was almost like he knew that something had happened to them, and he was trying to kind of coax information out of him or get him to remember. But he never went into depth. He never sort of said to him, "Do you remember seeing that? Being out there on that night? What happened? You vanished," or anything like that. He never told him exactly what had gone on. But it was almost like he was trying to prompt him to remember what had happened. What happened with this?
Sorry, I was just going to say, so it sounds like that, because obviously the parents weren't there, the babysitter cousins saw whatever it was, and maybe some other people saw something. So it sounds like even though the parents didn't see it, they knew it was a UFO and that their children had been involved in some kind of event, and that it was known.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, because something had gone on because of the woman leaning out the window. It was they probably had the police looking for combing the area for them, but he never found out because the memories went, and then there's this kind of long number of years where he doesn't, he never asked anybody about what had happened because it would gone from his head. Now you're probably thinking, well, how can he have all this detail then about what happened with the being next to him and everything? Well, it came back to him later on, as things do, as flashbacks. And what triggered those flashbacks was another UFO sighting, a UFO sighting that happened in 1986. So now he's in his mid-teens, and that's about right, late teens. And he'd gone round his friend's house. It was a bright summer's day. And they were out there in the back garden playing. And what happened with that? I think that's right. I think we've got I might have the dates wrong. I'm trying to work out the ages. I like to get dates right where possible, but I did this one quite a while back. Anyway, so they're around there. They're playing frisbee in the back garden. It's a bright sunny day, and throwing this white frisbee around, and all of a sudden he ducks. It's like if he said it looked like the frisbee was being thrown directly at his face, and he instinctively ducks out of the way. And when he gets back up, he realizes it wasn't the frisbee. It's an object. It's an object about 400 feet away from them, off to the east, hovering in a clear blue sky. He said what it looked like. It was a domed disc. It was white and sort of slightly glowing. Don't forget, it's broad daylight, so part of that might have been reflective off the sun. It had interesting kind of scorch marks. It looked like kind of almost like burn marks on the top. He actually did a painting of this one, which he provided for me. It's in the report. And
are we in the same location where they had the first experience?
No, different house. So this took place at his friend's house, and they'd moved address from that. That was another point. That soon after the incident, they moved address. They moved away from House in Muir Road. Now, he doesn't know whether they moved house because of the incident or not. It's possible his parents were frightened about what had happened and just wanted to put it behind them and move address. He doesn't know. So he did quiz his brother, by the way. He quizzed his brother and his cousin later on, many years later. Yeah, and they don't remember. Blank from their mind completely. It came back to him because of this other UFO sighting, So because of the color of this, because of the white glow to this, it triggered the other memories of what had happened in 1971. And it came back to him, not immediately. It came back in the following days as fragmented memories, almost like just thinking back randomly. Like let's say you just randomly start thinking about an old holiday that you went on 20 years ago, kind of like that. So it wasn't nightmares or anything. It was broad daylight. He just had sort of waking flashbacks to it until he remembered everything, until he remembered the being. He remembered appearing inside this pink bubble of light. Anyway, so so this other case, what had happened? It was just there. It was hovering, and his friend thought it was some sort of remote controlled thing, but it was like, can't be. He said it's too big. He said it was about 25 foot across, he thinks. And it was just there, and it started to move off to the south. They watched it for a period of time until it kind of got lost behind some housing. Ran inside the house and ran upstairs to the bedroom window to carry on watching it. And it went along to a nearby river close to central Glasgow. Sorry, the exact name of the river, I forget now. River Clyde, I think. River Clyde, that's the one. Yeah. It reaches the River Clyde, does a right angle turn, and then starts following the River Clyde to the west. As it moves away into the distance, all of a sudden there's a loud roar. By this point, he'd gone back down outside, and he was chatting about the experience with the mum who was there on the steps and his friend. And his friend still insisted it was some sort of remote controlled kite or something, and it was like, it's far too big for it to be that. It's ridiculous. Anyway, while they're there, all of a sudden they hear this loud roaring sound, and two fighter jets all of a sudden fly right overhead and head off in the same direction that this object had traveled in. So it looked like a military intercept had taken place. There's a base, but it's quite far north from Glasgow, but obviously they could have got there in minutes at the speed that they go at. So, but he doesn't know anything more about that. He just knows that there were jets, and he said that it wasn't. You usually wouldn't have low-flying, very loud jets over a populated area, of course. So it does look like a military interception. So there's those two things. There's one further case. There's one further incident I want to discuss because it has indirect links with this one. Well, no, direct links, should I say. And it's absolutely fascinating and somewhat disturbing in certain aspects. So we're going to move forward now. Again, we're going to move forward to the mid-90s. He's in his late 20s. And there's a loch northwest called Gare Loch. And him and his friends used to go out fishing on the loch. Halfway along the north side of the loch is a little boating centre. And they used to head out from there. Also halfway along the loch is a stately home called Blair Vadach Manor. It's still there today. I think it's used for offices now or something, but back then it was a a proper stately home, and they used to rent out the grounds so people could utilize the grounds around the house. And one of his friends, his father owned a caravan that was there on the grounds of this stately home that they'd use. So they go out fishing for the day, and then they go back and they go in the caravan, just relax in the evening, and then in the morning they'd travel back into town and go home. So what happened was they'd gone out fishing on the loch, and it had started to rain. It was about 6:30, so they decided to call it a day. Moored the boat, went into the caravan, and they're all there in the caravan, just chatting, just having a nice evening. I think he mentioned they had a couple of drinks. I don't believe that drinks were in any way linked with what happened at all. Just wanted to say that. So the caravan curtains are all open, and it gets to quite late at night. I think it was about 11 o'clock, and all of a sudden they notice, one of his friends notices somebody coming along the road. So the road ran right alongside the stately home grounds, and so they're on the edge of this, and then there's a hedge, and then there's the road, and on the far side of the road is this boating centre. And they notice in the distance along the road somebody coming along the pavement. But this is where things start to get really, really weird, because the height of the hedge, they could see the torso of this person above the hedge, and they said that if it had been walking on the ground, it would have made the person about 12 foot high. So they could see that it was too distant to see. It was obviously the shape of somebody coming along. Now his friend highlights this to John, the main witness I spoke with, and John looks out and sees this chap, and immediately his brain puts two and two together. His brain thinks it's a car, right, driving along the pavement for whatever reason. It's come up on the pavement, and there's a sunroof open, and somebody's leaning up at the top of the sunroof. Okay, and there they can see their torso. This is what his brain thinks, because that's the only way that would logically explain it. He thinks, you say, like, why would a car be doing that, and why would somebody do that anyway? And it's coming along, and it's coming nearer, and they're keeping watch on this. And as it got closer, he said that it was very strange. It was almost like this figure was kind of floating along, like not even walking. There was no real movement to it. It was just going like that. Yeah. And it's coming nearer down the road, and him and his two friends are looking at it. They can see it clearly. And as it comes nearer, all of a sudden he realizes it's the same being that he saw back in 1971.
Oh, wow.
Wearing the same clothing. He said it had the black suit on again. This time he could see its head from the front. Now, they could only see it at a distance. So at a distance, all he could see was dark. He described them as dark holes. I mean, he was describing a grey, but he didn't know how to describe a grey yet, because he hadn't looked in depth into the subject. So he said its eyes looked like hollow sockets. That's what he described it as, just black holes where its eyes should have been. But it was the being. It was it. And he realised, and he says to his friends, he says, "That's it. That's the thing we saw back in 1971. But his friends can see it too, and they're just gobsmacked, and they're looking at this thing, and I assume it was up off the ground, hovering behind the hedge or something."
They see the full body of it and see where it was in relation to the ground.
No, because its legs would have been hidden down behind the hedge, so that they could see the top half of it moving along like this, and it's floating along very eerily, and it keeps on coming closer and closer, and at its closest point they lose sight of it at the main end window of the caravan, and now they move to the left side window, and they're carrying on looking at it, at the point it becomes level with them, it's now only about 10 feet away from them, it's just a hedge at the other side, as it becomes level with them, he said its head turned and looked directly at them like this, just sideways, just looked. And then it carried on moving until it went out of sight. It didn't come towards the caravan or anything. It just carried on moving along the path. But that's not the end of it, because a second later, as these noises start banging, loud banging sounds, thuds outside the caravan, and this weird screaming type sound, and they realise it's coming from the other side of the caravan. Now the other side window of the caravan, they had the curtains closed, on it. And they realise that these sounds are coming from the other side of this window, the other side of this closed curtain.
Outside or inside?
Outside.
Oh.
There's something outside the caravan making these thudding noises and these strange screaming sounds. One of his friends plucks up courage because they don't know what's going on. They're quite, obviously frightened by what's just happened with this strange being going past, and then this all starts. His friend creeps to the curtains and pulls it back. And what he sees is a sheep's face pushed up against the window. There's a sheep up off the ground, several feet off the ground, being forcibly pushed into the other side of the window. The thuds they can hear are the sheep's legs bashing against the outside of the caravan, and the screaming sounds is the sheep panicking. So it's up in the air, and obviously it's pretty horrific, what would you do? He immediately backs off, the curtains go closed, thing stops, bang, stops. The noise stops, there's nothing, it's dead silence. Obviously they're all very, very concerned by this point, pretty scared, to be fair. One of his two friends reacted very, very badly to the situation. He proceeded to go around the caravan, searching through all the drawers. He found some of that safety rope, some of that blue safety rope. He got that out, and then he proceeded to tie all the door handles and the window handles and everything with it, like a spider web, all around the outside of the caravan, kind of panicking, trying to block all the doors and windows so nothing could get in.
Outside, then?
What's that?
Had that guy gone outside?
No, from the inside door handle and the inside latches. He didn't go outside. So he ties up all the windows and the door, and then he goes and sits underneath the table, cross-legged, quite obviously in a sense of shock. The other two, including John, just basically sit there, terrified. After a while, they start talking about, what happened and this sort of thing. They remain like that till morning light, till 6 a.m. They don't go to sleep. All of them stay awake because they're so frightened by what's happened. When the light starts to come up, they pluck up enough courage to have a peep outside. They look around. There's no sign of anything, no being, no sheep, nothing. They decide at that point to leave the caravan and walk back into town. They would usually, wait for a bus, but they just wanted to be out of the area as soon as possible. So they just basically all got out there and hiked about 10 or so miles back into the town and went back home.
What a bizarre, beyond bizarre experience. I mean, why? Poor little sheep. Wow. If it was.
So the thing with the sheep, I mean, there's various theories, obviously, with the sheep. John wonders whether this being was trying to frighten them on purpose. I don't know whether that was the case. I think it's more likely that the sheep was potentially picked up by a craft in the vicinity, in some kind of energy. Either it was going to take the sheep, abduct it, or whatever, or or it's just some kind of energy field, and it was just happened to be, no gravity or whatever. It was just up in the air. We don't really know. Obviously, you've got the animal mutilation thing, but there was no. It's not like they went outside and there was a mutilated sheep there or anything outside. It had just gone. Now, he did say that there was a field with some sheep in. Yes, so this is where the sheep had come from. It wasn't like a random sheep. There was an adjoining field to where they were that had some sheep in. So what he thinks happened was one of them had managed to get through the hedge or whatever and had come onto their area, but that didn't stop the fact that the thing was up in the air.
Wow.
Then you've got the being, and the fact that not only he saw it but his friends saw it, and the fact that it was the same being that he'd seen as a child, quite obviously a repeat visitation by this same entity, but his friends saw it clearly. And then you've got the fact that it didn't seem to interact with them. It just looked at them and then carried on moving. It didn't come to the caravan. There was no sense of any of them having any missing time. As I say, they stayed awake the whole night. John was pretty sure that they didn't lose any time. So he doesn't think they got taken. But absolutely fascinating and obviously quite disturbing. It's quite a creepy sense of a series of events.
I mean, I have to say, that's the first time I've ever heard of of a sheep if it was the real sheep that was used as a battering ram to get their attention. Poor sheep. I just
I think that I think it's more likely that it was involuntarily picked up in some kind of energy field. You know, the whole thing with the scaring thing. You have to ask why would it do that?
I know. Why is that?
Why randomly spook them out many years later and then not seemingly interact with them any further than doing that? Just
is there a special symbolism on sheep for them, or in another way?
No, not at all. No, which is what leads me to believe it was probably just it's possible there was a craft over the caravan or something, and the sheep had just been picked up in some kind of energy field.
Oh, right. And so it wasn't intentionally being used as a battering ram. It's just the consequence of it.
Yeah, I think it's unlikely it was being used. I think it's very unlikely. The whole idea that they were doing that on purpose to frighten them seems unlikely to me. And I'm not saying that it's entirely outside the realms of possibility. Yeah, of course it's not. But there's very, very few cases on record where the beings intentionally frighten people, as I'm sure you're aware. When people are frightened by these beings, it's usually through a sense of not understanding what's going on, and because they're very, very cryptic and don't really say much to people most of the time. So, which is obviously very frightening in its own right, but I don't think that it intentionally go out their way to frighten people.
Absolutely. I mean, that's sort of a huge range of experiences then, from sort of 7 till the 90s.
Oh, that's just a few of them. He's had about 20 or so experiences in total, including other UFO sightings. Most of the sightings have got multiple witnesses. At the moment, only his testimony. I always look to try to get multiple witness testimonies where possible, of course. I think with one of the cases we had a written statement by one of them, but he didn't want to talk to me. So the problem is, what people forget with this, is where you're dealing with a multiple witness case. If one person's willing to talk, the majority of the rest of them are still going to be in a sense of fear about it. Like, for example, the other 2 people with the caravan, both of them very, very negative towards the subject. Didn't want to know. He tried bringing it up later on with them, not because of me asking him to do that, just trying to bring it up with them in conversation, and they shut him down. They didn't want to know because they were so frightened about it, because of what had happened.
It's not uncommon that I've come across that, and I think I was mentioning to you the case of Canadian Steve Boucher.
Yes.
And he was talking about how his whole band was taken. I think it was in 71 as well, actually. That's in Canada, but But what I was thinking about that is that he struggled to, he fought to remember. He knew something strange was going on and all the rest of that. And when they were all reunited, about 4 or 5 of them, and he was the last, to come back to the group. He wanted to talk about it, and they said, no, that's it. We've all agreed we're not talking about this ever again.
Yeah.
And he was determined that he was going to try and, bring that forward. Anyway, that's another case.
It's hard for people to deal with, isn't it? It's people don't want to deal with it. This is why a lot of cases never see the light of day, and what we see as researchers is the tip of a massive iceberg. It really is. Right. I've spoken with so many people over the years, and I just ask them just in passing, when we get on the UFOs, randomly start talking about the subject, or they know because of what I do, and they want to talk about it with me. And and I'll invariably ask them, have you ever seen anything? Oh yeah, I saw something. I've seen a couple of things. You ever reported them? No. Most people don't bother reporting it, or are too frightened to report it, because of the ridicule thing, or because it's genuinely disturbed them and they don't want to know, and they block it out and they move it to a part of their brain. They know it happened, they know it's real, but they don't want to explore it, and they don't want to know what because it's too frightening for them. It's too outside of the norm for them. And that's why with some repeat cases, they don't even realize that they're having repeat contact experiences until they have a particular experience that, a trigger experience that then, and then they start to readdress things, and then they're like, oh yeah, but then was that incident, and then it was that time when I had the missing time, and then it was that with the psychic time. And you go back through it, and you find out that they've had stuff since childhood. So they start talking about one experience, but when you start delving into it, you find they've had loads of experiences. It's wild.
With John, then, in this set of interesting cases since he was 7 years old, I often find that people have enhanced aptitudes, abilities, faculties,
Yes.
maybe you want to call them, different from, I'm going to say you and I you know, generally speaking, and I don't mean
Yes.
that they become superhumans, but maybe
Yes.
maybe develop a superhuman skill or faculty. And I'm just wondering if John noticed anything like that.
You know what? I think this is actually one of the cases where that didn't happen. Where I was almost expecting it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, a while back I did a count. Yeah. So when I had quite a few cases in them about, I decided to do a count to see how the sort of percentages that different things were coming at. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I found out that in 55% of the contact cases that I dealt with up to that point, somebody had experienced one or more psychic type ability.
Yeah.
Usually premonitions, less common, kind of high empathy, high intuition of people's emotions, and then some other things that are very uncommon. Most of the time, premonitions either of events that were going to kind of cause them harm, or sometimes just completely random events of just seeing something and then it happening a year later, this sort of thing. And that just happens it comes out far too much for it to be just coincidence. Now with this particular case, if I recall, I don't remember John ever saying. No, I'm pretty sure that there wasn't any premonition type stuff with this one, which I found interesting because of the number of cases and I never tried to force anything particular. I just said, okay, that's fine. If he hasn't had any experiences, like I asked him, of course.
But sometimes the guys, you've probably heard this as well. I mean, they develop on the creative side, like they become an artist, or they found they've got drawing skills or musical skills that and they're not musical. They may be a builder. They may be, somebody else. Some other trade, which they have never had their.
It's really interesting, isn't it?
It's absolutely, and it's all, to me, I found it in some way or another. Absolutely, I don't think I've come across anybody who would say that they hadn't even had anything. I mean, one guy, how spurious is this? I said, well, if you could say you had a superpower as a result of that. He said, well, there's a small person. And he said, well, part of one of the jobs I did was, industrial cleaning, and there'd be a group of 3 or 4 of us and go and do all that job. And he said, I found that I could do, I had the stamina of about 3 or 4 people, and in real time. So he was like this jip. You could get these, and it was noticeable. People noticed it as well. That may sound quite a very bizarre one, but it's something that, why would it trigger something like that in him?
Some kind of enhancement, It's really interesting, And I often wonder whether the beings are, whether in some of these cases the beings are interested in them because they've got these abilities. And that's why they're contacting them. And they're in these abilities are innate from childhood, or whether it's some kind of gift and that they're being given them,
stimulation,
or either directly, if it is a gift, is it a direct gift or is it an indirect gift? Is it that the beings, and in meeting and maybe communicating directly with these entities, it unlocks areas of the brain from that point onwards for them. All we do know is that it's happening far too regularly for it to just be coincidence. I think anybody has got, that's pretty, for me 55%, I think that's far too much. If you consider how unusual it would be for somebody to say that they had psychic type abilities, the fact that over half of the people I've investigated who've had contact have had kind of some kind of premonition thing or high intuition or something like that, or were able to predict drawings and this sort of thing.
Absolutely.
And then actually maybe with John there was something, because as I said, in childhood he'd written down a few ghost type experiences. Were those ghost experiences through having a sixth sense that he didn't realize that he had? And so maybe he had innate sixth sense type abilities, but he didn't interpret them as such.
So did John find that his brother had continued experiences, or did it just sort of stay with, at his door?
It just seemed to stay with him, almost like it was focused on him. As I said, a lot of his experiences involved other people, so involved friends who also saw the same as him and this sort of thing. But it seemed to be focused around him primarily. And you get that with a lot of cases. It's possible his older brother was just indirectly linked with it was taken because he happened to be there alongside him.
Yeah. Did he, at any chance, after he had the memory, recall, did he ever go back to his parents and say his dad would, talk about that?
He's, I think, from what I recall, because this is a few years ago now, when I spoke with him. I think one of his parents had passed away.
Oh, right, okay.
And his other parent was again very negative to talking about the subject, and I think he said that they weren't negative to it. They were just quite very, very skeptical of it. Yeah. So he worked that out with them through previous conversations.
And did you ask him? I don't know if the gentleman has had children himself, because sometimes it follows the lineage, doesn't it? So I just wondered if he has had children, whether. Yes,
he has. Yeah, there was one experience involving his son. I mean, again, this will open up another one of his. It was an unusual one, a broad daylight sighting of an entity, a being of some kind.
Oh, right.
In broad daylight that him and his son saw.
Oh, right.
But again, I could go. Again, we could.
It's It's absolutely fascinating. But I think what this has shown, again, if anybody needs it to be shown, is that us researchers and people having the experiences, I mean, it's just ongoing. And you know, here to help log it along with a lot of other people in the UK and the rest of the world to help people share their experiences, whether it's on camera. Because someone once said to me, "Oh, I don't want to be famous. I'm not doing it to be famous." I said, "It's not to do with being famous. Who's ever famous from putting their record on camera?" I said, "No." He said, it's a social service. It helps other people, because I've had contacts like you've had who have said, "I've come forward because I've heard somebody else speaking. It's given me the courage."
Yeah.
And
exactly.
And it's given them the courage. They've shared some, another experience or an experience of their own, nothing related to the other person, just that they saw it and thought, if they can do it, then I can speak about it. And I'm telling you folks out there who this is new to, it takes a lot of courage for these people to speak. Oh, have we gone? Have we gone? I've got another picture come up. No, there we go. I don't know what that was. So I just want to flag that up and underscore that and say, please be kind. Please be compassionate with people. If they're your best friend and they tell you that they've had an experience, once you're sure they're not pulling your leg or whatever, be kind. Don't laugh at them and point them in Dave's direction or mine or many people around the planet to speak to share and perhaps bring some understanding. I'm not saying I have answers. I don't, but you get. I don't think
any of us have all the answers. I think if any researcher kind of says they've got all the answers, I think you'd have to be very wary. There's a lot of unknowns, but I think the important thing to do with the subject, I think the important thing is to not ignore it and not pretend like it's not going on, because it's obviously going on. So. People have said to me before in the past, they said, "You're doing all this, Dave. You're spending so much time. You're not going to get the answers you seek." And I'm like, and I always go back with, well, at least I'm trying to find the answers rather than just ignore it.
Yeah, and also I think that this is the drip exposure. I call it exposure with disclosure, or the other way around, disclosure with exposure, because we're the soft end of it. We're moving this on by, so the public do see the work, in time eventually, maybe bit by bit, feeding. But this is disclosure. Everyone
absolutely
is willing to speak on camera. They don't have to speak on camera. I'm not saying people do, but when I offer that, sometimes people misunderstand that. Oh, this is going to be something. I said, no, it's just simply a record. If you would like to do that, you don't have to. But I think it is so helpful for other experiences who are coming off the fence and who want to share their experience, because it all adds to our education, wherever that.
Well, exactly,
Wherever that leads, I don't know, but I do think that it is a very valuable contribution to human, to the human experience and understanding of. Well, the fact is that we're not alone. Never have been.
Well, it's wild, isn't it? I mean, once I can't remember how old I was when I hit that point, but anybody who delves into the subject in a great way, you'll reach a point with it.
Yeah.
Where you're like, this is really going on.
Yeah.
And I don't base my thought. I don't like to consider myself in the same way. It's not really blind faith. I go on what the evidence tells me from case after case after case.
Yeah.
And some of this stuff I talk about, and it's really wild. It is wild, and I totally understand why people dismiss it outright. Yeah, because some of it sounds really wild. But when you talk with 100 people from completely different backgrounds, many of which have got no interest in UFOs and contact at all, and they tell you the same stuff with the same types of entities, even down to the clothing that those entities have been wearing and things in some cases. You have to entertain that. You have to be like, this is obviously some kind of real experience is happening.
But listen, David, I have to say thank you very, very much. And I think maybe we should do a little thing like this whenever, and not leave it a few years next time too.
Sure, yeah, I'm always happy to talk.
Maybe a case catch up. That might be fun to do in Britain, because there's a lot of things going on in Britain, right? And I think still people don't realise that. So it'd be nice to highlight maybe a couple of us talking about some of the Brit cases.
Oh, sure, yeah, absolutely.
Or continuing, I think it would be nice. So, Dave, I'm going to let you go back to your family now. And
Probably got bored and gone to sleep. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's been lovely chat.
I will be putting out all the information about where you can check Dave's information and the stuff about his UFO wave game stuff and all of that at the end of this. So thanks everybody for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. This is the ETN Files. Thanks for all your work with BUFOG. Brilliant.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.